Muhammad Ali was used to having the last word. Then somebody told him about Brian Clough. By the early 1970s, Clough had become one of the great characters of British football. He had taken Derby County from the second division to champions of England. But television revealed another side of him. Clough was confident, provocative, quick-witted, and wonderfully unpredictable. Put a microphone in front of him, and anything could happen. Brian Moore understood that better than most. Moore was calm and measured. Clough was anything but. Together, they made wonderful television. Then the big match produced something nobody could have planned. A message arrived from Muhammad Ali. Ali had heard about this English football personality called Brian Clough. The funny part was that he didn't seem to know much about him. But Ali had heard one important thing. Apparently, Clough could talk, and people were comparing him with Muhammad Ali. Ali wasn't having that. With the playful arrogance that made his interviews almost as entertaining as his fights, he reminded everyone there was only one Muhammad Ali. Then came the warning.
I'm the talker. Now, Clough, I've had enough. Stop it.
Clough, I've had enough. Stop it. Back in the studio, Brian Moore turned to Clough. Had Muhammad Ali finally silenced him? Clough smiled. No, I want to fight him. It was classic Clough. The world's most famous boxer had told him to stop talking. Clough's response was to challenge him to a fight. And somehow, it made perfect sense. Ali and Clough came from completely different worlds, yet both possessed enormous self-belief. Both loved an audience. Both could turn an ordinary interview into entertainment. And both had the achievements to justify that confidence. Ali was boxing's great showman. Clough had taken Derby County to the Championship of England. But at this point, they were still virtually strangers. Ali mainly knew Clough as the English football man, who apparently talked too much. Clough simply knew that Muhammad Ali had noticed him. It could have remained one wonderful piece of television. Instead, Clough eventually traveled to New York. And when he finally met Muhammad Ali face to face, the joke became even better. Ali still wasn't entirely sure who Brian Clough was. Subscribe if you still love the legends who made football unforgettable. Brian Clough eventually got his chance to answer Muhammad Ali face to face. In January 1974, Clough traveled to New York for Ali's second fight with Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden. For Clough, this wasn't just another sporting trip. The man who had jokingly ordered him to stop talking was suddenly going to be standing in front of him. Clough later summed up the prospect perfectly. Ego meets ego. But when the meeting finally happened, there was a wonderful problem. Muhammad Ali didn't really know who Brian Clough was. According to Clough's own account, Ali initially showed little excitement about meeting him. Then they shook hands. Ali looked at the confident Englishman standing in front of him and asked what he actually did. Clough explained that he was a football manager. Ali found that amusing. To him, football managers were supposed to be older men, usually graying and looking as though they had spent years worrying about their teams. Clough didn't fit the picture at all. He was still only in his 30s. Ali joked that he looked young enough to still be playing. It was a priceless reversal. Back in Britain, Ali had heard enough about Clough's talking to tell him to keep quiet. Now Clough had travelled thousands of miles to meet him, only to discover Ali still needed an explanation of who he was. But the awkwardness didn't last. Clough remembered Ali warming to him once they began talking. And for Clough, the trip was about to become far more significant than one funny meeting. He was there to watch Ali fight Joe Frazier. Up close, Clough was going to see the difference between Muhammad Ali, the extraordinary talker, and Muhammad Ali, the extraordinary fighter. And what he witnessed at Madison Square Garden completely changed the tone. The jokes remained, but Clough's opinion of Ali was about to become something much deeper. What Clough saw that night left a lasting impression on him. It wasn't simply the result, it was the way Ali moved. Clough watched the speed, balance, and remarkable calm of a man performing under enormous pressure. And suddenly, the famous mouth made more sense. Clough had enormous confidence himself, but he also recognized exceptional talent when he saw it. Ali had it in abundance. Years later, when Clough wrote about that night, his admiration was unmistakable. What fascinated him was the grace behind the fighter. For all the noise surrounding Ali, Clough saw something beautifully controlled once the contest began. He came to regard Ali as more than simply a boxer. To Clough, there was something artistic about him. That was extraordinary praise. from a man who rarely placed anyone above himself. The trip that had begun with jokes about two enormous egos had given Clough genuine respect for the man behind the showmanship. But the story wasn't finished. Later that same year, Muhammad Ali returned to British television for an interview with Michael Parkinson. The conversation became increasingly heated. Eventually, Parkinson turned towards his studio audience for another voice. Sitting there was Brian Clough. Clough couldn't resist. He joined the conversation as though he and Ali were old acquaintances. Ali looked towards Parkinson. Then came the question that made the whole thing priceless. Who is this guy? Clough had traveled to New York. He had met Ali. He had watched him fight. And apparently, Muhammad Ali still couldn't quite remember Brian Clough. And somehow, Clough had managed to make an already extraordinary interview even more unpredictable. He told Ali that he had lost his cool. Then, without showing Parkinson any favor, he told him that he had lost his temper as well. Clough had somehow turned himself into the referee. Parkinson later remembered the situation with amusement. Of all the people who might have stepped into such an exchange, it had to be Brian Clough. And Clough wasn't intimidated by either man. He spoke to Ali exactly as he might have spoken to a footballer in his dressing room. He spoke to Parkinson with the same certainty. For a few wonderful moments, the football manager had taken over somebody else's television interview. It showed why Clough was so difficult to ignore. He didn't need to be the scheduled guest. He didn't need to be discussing football. If Clough had an opinion, there was a good chance everyone in the room was going to hear it. That quality could make him infuriating, but it also made him magnificent television. The moment became another unlikely chapter in his connection with Ali. It had started with Ali jokingly ordering him to stop talking. Then came their meeting in America. Now Clough was sitting in a British television studio, telling Ali where he had gone wrong in an argument. There was one broadcaster, however, who had spent years dealing with exactly this version of Brian Clough. Brian Moore never tried to outshout him. He rarely needed to restrain him. Instead, Moore learned something far more effective. He knew when to challenge Clough, when to let him run, and when to simply sit back and enjoy what happened next. That partnership produced moments football supporters would remember for decades. Yet Moore wasn't simply there to laugh along. He challenged Clough when necessary. One of their most memorable exchanges came around England's crucial World Cup qualifier against Poland in 1973. Before the match, Clough had dismissed Polish goalkeeper Jan Tomaszewski in typically colourful fashion. Then Tomaszewski produced the performance of his life. England attacked relentlessly, but could only draw 1-1, ending their hopes of reaching the 1974 World Cup. It left Clough in an uncomfortable position. Moore knew it. Rather than allowing the earlier remarks to disappear, he brought Clough back to them. Clough, predictably, wasn't interested in surrendering. That was the magic of the pairing. Moore could expose the weakness in Clough's argument without turning the exchange nasty. Clough could defend an almost impossible position while still making viewers smile. And it happened again and again over the years. Clough might tease a player, dismiss an opinion, or interrupt another pundit. Moore would give him that familiar look and quietly pull him back. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes Clough simply carried on. But behind all that television sparring, something more genuine had developed. Moore was no longer simply the broadcaster sitting beside football's most unpredictable manager. He had become someone Clough genuinely trusted. And away from the cameras, their relationship was far warmer than their television arguments suggested. Years later, Brian Moore was being honoured for his broadcasting career. Clough was invited to take part. Naturally, he didn't settle for a simple tribute. He appeared with a presentation and then began singing Cole Porter's "You're the Top." It was funny, unexpected, and unmistakably Clough. But this time, there was no argument to win. He was simply celebrating someone he genuinely valued. In 1990, Moore later presented Cloughie, the Brian Clough story. By then, the young manager Muhammad Ali, once barely recognised, had become one of British football's most famous figures. The humour between Moore and Clough was still there. So was the affection. When Moore died in 2001, Clough attended his funeral despite his own declining health. There were no cameras to impress that day, just Clough saying goodbye to an old friend. And it showed that behind all those famous television exchanges, some of the relationships were very real. Clough never needed a major controversy to be entertaining. Sometimes the smallest moments were the funniest. During the 1986 World Cup, Mike Channon was making a point when Clough suddenly interrupted with a joke about educated bees. Brian Moore burst out laughing. Another time, Moore called young Michael Laudrup a wonder boy. Clough immediately objected. In his view, no 19-year-old had lived long enough to deserve the title. Moore argued back. Clough refused to move. That was why viewers kept watching. Nobody quite knew where Clough would take a conversation, and Moore often enjoyed the surprise as much as the audience. Football television simply turned on the cameras and let the personalities do the rest. So what did Muhammad Ali really make of Brian Clough? Perhaps the simplest answer is the best. Clough amused him. Ali recognized another huge personality, confident, outspoken, and completely unwilling to stay quiet. Whenever their worlds crossed, the humor came naturally. That is why those moments still feel special. They belong to an era many supporters remember as football's golden years. Saturday afternoons, packed terraces, familiar television voices, and characters who seemed larger than the game itself. Then, briefly, Muhammad Ali entered that world too. The biggest personality in boxing met one of football's biggest personalities. Nobody needed to manufacture the entertainment. They simply talked. And half a century later, people still remember it. Those clips don't only bring back Ali and Clough. For many supporters, they bring back what football itself once felt like. If football's golden years still bring back great memories, subscribe and let's keep those stories alive.